Hey everybody, this video is called The Maiden's Dream, and tonight we continue our pass-through study here through our short study of the book of Song of Solomon, where we're going to be looking tonight at the Maiden's Dream and her describing her beloved. So we are in chapter 5, and we're going to look at verse 1, starting out. It says, I have come to my garden, my sister, my spouse. I have gathered my marital with my spice. I have eaten my honeycomb with my honey. I have drunk my wine with my milk. Eat, O friends, drink, yes, drink deeply, O beloved ones. So, while the guests feasted, the couple consummated their marriage, and in Solomon he announced the blessing. And given the intimate and private nature of the sexual union, it seems difficult to understand anyone but God speaking these words, eat, O friend. As Proverbs 5:21 tells us, for the ways of a man are before the eyes of the Lord, and he watches all his paths. So this is a divine affirmation of sexual love between a husband and a wife as holy and beautiful. And some will argue that the second part of verse 1 is the daughters of Jerusalem speaking, celebrating the beauty of love. But the beloved received her virginity as a precious gift, and now her sexuality is now his own, belonging to him, just like his sexuality is hers, belonging to her, as the Apostle Paul puts it in 1 Corinthians 7. And we're going to discuss that again in the wrap-up. And the beloved poet described how pleasing their experience of intimacy was by using images of luxury and satisfaction. And some will argue that Edo Friends was the groom. Another point of view is that the groom left the marriage bedroom to speak with the remaining guests of the wedding party. And one of the theologians popular for that is Adam Clarke. And from here through the rest of the book, the final section will feature their first argument and reconciliation. So just like every marriage, you have your honeymoon and then you start arguing. And inevitable discord comes to even the most ideal marriages. And remember that in chapter 2 verse 15, remember that comment about not letting little foxes come between us? They will visit the home in this segment. And in verse 2, it says, I sleep, but my heart is awake. It is the voice of my beloved. He knocks, saying, open for me, my sister, my love, my dove, my perfect one. For my head is covered with dew, my locks with the drops of the night. So some have suggested here that the beloved here is in having dreams such as chapter 3, verse 1 through 4 speaks about. However, she acknowledges that her heart is awake, indicating that she wasn't sound asleep. And to make this dream would make the rest of the book a dream, which is highly unlikely. And it appears Solomon returned home earlier than expected and wanted to give his bride a romantic surprise. And the knocking awakened her. And open to me is a request not only to enter into the room, but also for sexual union. And in verse 3 through 6 it says, I have taken off my robe. How can I put it on again? I have washed my feet. How can I defile them? My beloved put his hand by the latch of the door, and my heart yearned for him. I arose to open for my beloved, and my hands dripped with myrrh, my fingers with liquid myrrh on the handles of the lock. I opened for my beloved, but my beloved had turned away and was gone. My heart leaped up when he spoke. I sought him, but I could not find him. I called him, but he gave me no answer. So we see that she has a groggy response to Solomon, and she's answering only with excuses, as she didn't want to be bothered out of inconvenience of dressing herself and preparing herself for sleep again. And she didn't want to be inconvenienced thinking about herself at that moment in time of her own comfort. And by the time she fully awakens and opens the door, her husband is departed. And in verse 5, myrrh was a rare and precious substance, as also seen back in Exodus 30, verse 23. And we don't know if she applied it before going to the door or if she had left it on the door hatch as a token of his love. And note, the beloved refused to force himself upon her and would only enter at her invitation. So we see that he wasn't toxic. In verse 7 and 8, says, the watchmen who went about the city found me. They struck me as they wounded me. The keepers of the walls took my veil away from me. I charge you, O daughters of Jerusalem, if you find my beloved, then you tell him I am lovesick. So unlike what happened in her dream back in chapter 3, verse 3, the watchmen here treated her badly. And between the darkness and the unfamiliar features of the new bride, this could easily have happened. And the veil was more likely speaking here of a scarf or a mantle, not the same veil that we saw back in Song of Solomon chapter 1 verse 7, chapter 4 verse 3, chapter 4 verse 11, and chapter 5 verse 3. And the maiden's plea to the daughters of Jerusalem shows that she came to regret and suffer under her previous actions. And now she is lovesick and she is aching for his absence. So verse 9 says, what is your beloved more than any other, and more than another beloved? O fairest among women, what is your beloved more than another beloved? So that you charge us. So the wise daughters of Jerusalem ask twice a question that prompts the bride to recall the superlative features of her new husband, coming up in verses 10 through 16, which says, my beloved is white and ruddy, chief among 10,000. His head is like finest gold. His locks are wavy and black as a raven. His eyes are like doves by the rivers of waters, washed with milk and fitly set. His cheeks are like bed of spices, banks of scented herbs. His lips are lilies, dripping liquid myrrh. His hands are rods of gold, set with beryl. His body is carved ivory, inlaid with sapphires. His legs are pillars of marble, set on bases of fine gold. His countenance is like Lebanon, excellent as the cedars. His mouth is most sweet. Yes, he is altogether lovely. He is my beloved. This is my friend, O daughters of Jerusalem. So we see that she responds that he is the chief among 10,000, which is another way of her saying he is the best of the best. In verse 10, Rudy was also used of Esau back in Genesis 25:25 and Genesis 25:30, as well as King David in 1 Samuel 16:12 and 1 Samuel 17 verse 42 as men of the outdoors. And she returns his compliments from back in Song of Solomon chapter 1 verse 15 and chapter 4 verse 1, that his eyes are like doves. In verse 11, black as a raven suggests that he displays strength and greatness. And verse 12, bathed in milk, refers to the whites of his eyes. And the description of the eyes in this verse is an example of a mixed metaphor. In verse 14, jewels, the exact stone cannot be determined. But in Exodus 28 verse 20, the same type of stone is set in gold on a breastplate worn by the high priest. And marriage involves being married to your best friend. And that is the way we need to view our marriages. We need to view it as our true best friend is our spouse. And ladies, make note from her. The admiration of a man's greatness is a strong motivator for accomplishment. You see, men, we like to be complimented. We like to be acknowledged when we do something well. And men want their wives to recognize whatever greatness or accomplishments he has attained. But we're going to wrap up at this point. It's a shorter chapter. And we see tonight that the beloved receives the offered virginity of the maiden. And we discussed how their sexuality became united, that when they became married, they belonged to each other. In 1 Corinthians 7:4, and I know we read this section, and it probably won't be the last time. 1 Corinthians 7:4 says, "The wife does not have authority over her own body, but the husband does. And likewise, the husband does not have authority over his own body, but the wife does." So the Apostle Paul taught as well. And keep in mind that you should never take 1 Corinthians 7:4. This principle never justifies a husband abusing his wife or threatening his wife sexually or otherwise. And Paul's point is that we have a binding obligation to serve our marriage partner with physical affection. And it's an awesome obligation that out of billions of people on this earth, that God has chosen one and only one alone to meet our sexual needs. And there is to be no one else. And we see the comment from heaven glorifying the goodness and purity of their love. In verse 2, the maiden dreams of her beloved coming to the door at night. And verse 3 through 6 shows us the maiden failed to meet her beloved at the door out of selfish reasons. And we all know about marital conflicts in our relationships. I don't think there's ever been a marriage on this earth where there hasn't been some sort of dispute between a married couple, or a disagreement, an argument, so on the case. And some of the causes that will really bring a fox, to destroy things, is one, resentment toward our spouse and refusing to be generous in forgiveness. You see, we need to be able to forgive our spouses easier than we can forgive someone else. Number 2, forcing interest and affections upon another, not waiting for their response. Number 3, refusing or delaying response when approached in a loving way and persistent way. Number 4, failure to value our spouse. Number 5, desire to control the relationships. And husbands, I already spoke to the ladies and now I'm coming for us. May we learn from Solomon here. Don't get angry when you feel like your wife has blown you off and disrespects you. Instead of getting angrily demanding respect, display love for her in a non-threatening way and wait out the response of love to her. Hold on, let me make sure I read my note right. Display love for her in a non-threatening way and wait out for the response of love. I think it was supposed to be from her. You see, in Ephesians chapter 5, the Apostle Paul says, "Husbands, love your wives as Christ has loved the church." There doesn't say in Ephesians 5 between the wives and husbands, if your partner doesn't, do this, that you are not obligated to meet that other area. And so verse 7 and 8, the maiden's disappointing search for her beloved. We see in verse 9 that the daughters of Jerusalem ask about the beloved. And then we see that the chapter ends with the maiden responding by describing the beloved. And we'll see in next as we're going to be looking at them reunite in love, and I'll announce when that will be. So I hope you have a great rest of your evening. God bless.